70 years gives you a certain kind of eyesight. You see the patterns in the wallpaper of life, the repetition. My name is Rose, and this is the story of the woman who smiled at my wedding, praised my cooking, and held my newborn son. All while plotting for 50 years to erase me from the picture. I married Arthur Sinclair in the spring of 1973. He was sunshine personified. His mother, Elizabeth, was the cloud management system. From the very first dinner, it began. Arthur loves my pot roast recipe, dear. I've written it down for you. It was a list of commandments, not ingredients. Arthur's shirts must be starched this way. He sleeps with the window open exactly 3 inches. I thought it was just motherly love, overbearing perhaps, but born of devotion. I was naive. Elizabeth wasn't protecting her son. She was protecting her territory, and I was the invader. Her affection for me was a performance, as intricate and fragile as her bone china. And I was the clumsy guest, always on the verge of breaking it. When our son, Benjamin, was born, I thought the spell would break, a new branch on the family tree. Elizabeth was ecstatic, too ecstatic. She called him my little prince. She had a nursery set up at her house without asking. She'd accidentally call herself Mama to him. When I corrected her, her smile never wavered. Silly me. Of course, you're Mama, Rose, for now. The cold truth settled in my stomach. I wasn't just the wife she tolerated. I was the incubator for the next generation of Sinclairs, the vessel. Once my purpose was served, the vessel could be shelved. Arthur never saw it. That's just how Mum is, he'd say, kissing my forehead. She means well. The poison Elizabeth administered wasn't in my tea. It was in the air. A dropped comment to Arthur about how tired I looked. A worried sigh to her friends about my frayed nerves after Ben was born. A helpful suggestion to my doctor that I seemed prone to melancholy. She was building a case, brick by brick, whisper by whisper, the narrative, dear sweet Rose, so fragile, so unstable, not quite up to the task of being a Sinclair. I fought it with every ounce of my strength. I became the perfect hostess, the tireless mother, the unshakable rock. It was exhausting. And she watched my performance with the cool appraisal of a director who'd already decided to recast the part. The heart of the Sinclair empire was Wisteria House, Arthur's childhood home. He finally saw it. A sprawling Victorian monster, Elizabeth ruled like a queen. Arthur adored it. I saw its damp corners and draining costs. Elizabeth's masterstroke was convincing Arthur, on his 40th birthday, to sign the house over to her for safekeeping and tax purposes, to avoid unfortunate eventualities. She meant me. I was the unfortunate eventuality. If anything happened to Arthur, I would be at the mercy of the woman who owned the roof over my head. I confronted Arthur that night. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but it was too late. The ink was dry. Elizabeth had her crown jewel. Arthur's heart gave out 10 years ago, quick, kind to him, cruel to me. In my grief, I was numb. Elizabeth, draped in black silk, was efficient. At the reading of the will, her lawyer explained, Arthur's personal assets came to me, a modest sum. The bulk of the estate, Wisteria House, the investments tied to it, were already, legally, Elizabeth's. She had orchestrated my financial neutering 2 decades prior. She patted my hand. Don't you worry, Rose. You'll always have a home with me. It was an invitation to a gilded prison, to be the live-in ghost, the pitied widow, dependent on her for every crust of bread. My son Ben, bless him, was furious. But the law was the law. Elizabeth had won. After the funeral, while Elizabeth held court downstairs, I climbed to the attic of my own home. Among Arthur's things, I found a small locked rosewood box, his father's. The key was hidden in an old tobacco tin. Inside weren't treasures, but truths, letters. From Elizabeth to her sister, written in the early years of my marriage. The girl is common, but she'll do for breeding. Arthur will tire of her sentimentality. I've spoken to Dr. Lennox about her nervous disposition. We must document it. The house is secure. She will never get her hands on what is rightfully ours. 50 years of suspicion confirmed in cold ink. It wasn't just dislike. It was a premeditated, patient campaign of eradication. I sat in the dust, those papers in my lap, and my grief hardened into something else, something sharp. I didn't confront her. Confrontation is for people who want an apology. I wanted justice. I became an archivist of my own life. I gathered every note, every backhanded compliment on a birthday card, every medical concern letter she'd sent to my doctors. Ben helped me find a lawyer, a fierce young woman named Mara, who saw Elizabeth's game for what it was, a lifelong act of coercive control and financial abuse. We didn't sue for the house. We sued for undoing. We used her own weapon, paper, against her. Mara argued that Elizabeth's influence over Arthur constituted undue influence, that the property transfer was fraudulent. We exposed the pattern. The narrative of Fragile Rose was entered into evidence as proof of Elizabeth's malice. The hearing was her last stage. Elizabeth, now 95, played the confused, heartbroken matriarch to perfection. "After all I've done for her," she wept. But when Mara presented the attic letters, the performance shattered. The cold calculation in those words, written a lifetime ago, echoed in the sterile courtroom. The judge, a woman with wise eyes, saw the pattern too. The transfer was nullified. Wisteria House became part of Arthur's true estate, which came to me and Ben. Elizabeth was ordered to pay my legal fees. The victory wasn't sweet. It was ashes. But they were my ashes. I sold the monster house. It held only ghosts and bad air. With the money, Ben and I started the Rosewood Trust. We help other people, mostly women, who find themselves trapped in slow-burn family wars. Picked apart by smiles and legal documents, Elizabeth lives in a very luxurious care home, paid for by the remains of her fortune. Ben visits her out of duty. I do not. Some bridges are not just burned, they are dismantled, brick by brick, and the river is filled in. She pretended to love me for 50 years. It was the longest, most expensive performance of her life. And in the end, all she bought herself was a luxurious solitude. So, my dear ones, listen to an old woman. Watch the hands, not the smile. Read the patterns, not the promises. And if you ever feel a chill in a room that's supposed to be warm, trust it. Your eyesight is better than you think. After the quiet from Elizabeth settled, I thought my war was over. I was a fool. Wars don't end. They just change battlefields. The first letter came a month after the trust was founded. It was from a woman named Cora in a town 200 miles away. Her story was a mirror held up to my past. A charming son-in-law, a sudden diagnosis of incapacity, a bank account drying up like a parched stream. She'd read about my case in a local paper. "You are the only one who might believe me," she wrote. Ben thought I was mad. "Mum, you can't get involved in strangers' legal battles. You're not a detective." But I wasn't a detective. I was an archivist. And Cora's plea was a primary source waiting to be verified. I packed a small bag, my digital recorder, and a folder of my own legal papers, proof that the impossible could be undone. Driving to her, the miles unfurling, I felt a purpose I hadn't known since Arthur was alive. Not to be a wife or a mother, but a witness. Cora lived in a little cottage drowning in climbing roses. She served me strong tea in a shaky hand. Her eyes held the same hunted look I'd seen in my own mirror for years. The son-in-law, David the Darling, as she called him with bitter irony, had moved in to help. Now he controlled the mail, the phone, the groceries. He'd taken her to a new doctor, who asked confusing questions about dates and names. The pattern was so clear, so brutally familiar, it took my breath away. We documented everything. The missing heirlooms put in safe storage. The changed passwords. The way David would speak over her, finishing her sentences with incorrect answers, building his narrative of her confusion. I taught Cora to use the voice memo app on her phone. We began a ledger of discrepancies. It was Elizabeth's playbook, but performed by a cruder, greedier actor. David was impatient, and impatience makes mistakes. David's mistake was a shredder. Cora, playing the confused old bird, asked to see a bank statement to help remember her PIN. He showed her one, then later fed it into a small shredder in the study. He didn't see her drop her knitting basket, spilling wool all over the floor. When she cleaned up, she retrieved the shreds. That night, in her bedroom with the door locked, we pieced together strips of paper like a murder mystery. It showed a $15,000 transfer to an offshore account. We didn't go to the local police, not yet. Cora's story of a meddling friend wouldn't hold. Instead, I called Mara, my lawyer. She connected us to a forensic accountant she knew, a man named Felix who worked for the smell of justice and strong coffee. We sent him the scanned shreds, the voice memos, the ledger. He worked in the shadows, tracing digital breadcrumbs. Felix found something that turned my blood cold. The offshore account wasn't just David's. It received small, regular deposits from over a dozen different names across 3 counties. It was a funnel. David wasn't a lone wolf. He was a salesman for a larger operation. My fight was no longer just about Cora. We had stumbled onto a machine designed to harvest the lives of the old and the isolated. As we built the case, I received a visitor, a man in an impeccably tailored suit, Martin Thorne. He sat in my parlor, exuding a calm, expensive menace. He represented interests who were impressed by my work with Elizabeth. He offered a generous grant for the Rosewood Trust, on the condition we focused on education rather than active intervention, a bribe wrapped in philanthropic paper. "The world you're poking, Mrs. Sinclair, has teeth," he said softly. I showed him the door. With Felix's evidence and Mara's strategy, we set a trap. Cora, wearing a wire, told David she wanted to change her will, to leave everything to a cat sanctuary she'd invented. Greed overpowered his caution. He took her to a complicit notary. On the recording, he coached her, putting words in her mouth, clearly establishing his undue influence. As they left the office, Mara and 2 police officers were waiting. David's arrest was the tremor. The earthquake came when he, facing prison, gave up his handler in exchange for leniency. The handler gave up more. The network began to unravel. Our little trust was suddenly at the center of a regional scandal. The phone started ringing, not just with pleas for help, but with threats. A rock through my sitting room window. A flat tire with a slash through the sidewall. The teeth Martin Thorne warned me about were bared. Ben was terrified for me. He wanted me to stop, to move, to hide. But you can't hide from a shadow that's already inside you. Instead, we adapted. Felix recommended a security consultant, a former soldier named Caleb. Gruff, scarred, with eyes that missed nothing. He turned my cottage into a fortress of discreet cameras and motion sensors. He also began training me. "Awareness is your best weapon, Rose," he'd say. "See the pattern before it sees you." One of the voices on the phone was different. A young man, voice thick with shame and anger. His name was Leo. He confessed that his own father was trying to do to his grandmother what David had done to Cora. He wanted to stop it, but didn't know how. He'd heard about us. He wasn't a victim pleading for help. He was a potential ally, drowning in guilt. I invited him to meet. Leo was all sharp angles and desperate energy. He showed me documents, emails, recordings he'd made on his phone. His father, Robert, was a respected businessman, a pillar of the community. His grandmother, Eleanor, was sharp but lonely. The plan was sophisticated, using private care homes and medical professionals. It was Elizabeth's strategy, but with corporate-level resources. Helping him would mean going up against powerful, connected people, the kind Martin Thorne represented. I looked at Leo, saw the determination warring with fear, and saw my son Ben. I saw a chance to break the cycle, not just for one grandmother, but to strike at a higher tier of the machine. We formed an alliance. My trust provided the strategy and the legal firepower of Mara. Leo provided the inside access. Caleb provided the operational security. We called it Operation Legacy. Leo, under our guidance, played the dutiful but concerned grandson to his father. He allowed himself to be recruited into the plan, gathering more evidence. He recorded meetings with the smooth-talking care home director. He got copies of the falsified medical assessments. The scale was breathtaking. It wasn't one house. It was a pipeline of vulnerable elders being moved into facilities where their assets could be bled dry. The key to the whole operation was a fundraising gala for the Golden Years Foundation, a charity front for the network. Leo got us invitations. I went, dressed in a borrowed designer gown, playing the part of a wealthy, slightly vague widow looking to endow a bed. Caleb was my nephew and driver. We mingled. I saw Martin Thorne there, schmoozing with the very officials who should have been regulators. The corruption was in the open, disguised as philanthropy. At the gala, I was introduced to the founder, Dr. Alistair Finch. Charming, silver-haired, with a voice like melted chocolate. He spoke of dignity and compassionate care. But his eyes, when they rested on the wealthy elderly attendees, were those of a farmer assessing a ripe crop. He was the architect, the Elizabeth to a dozen different families. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Dr. Finch, believing me to be a potential donor, let his guard down. He boasted about their proprietary assessment model that could fast-track necessary care. He mentioned a sympathetic judge who understood the complexities of geriatric management. Caleb, from across the room, captured it all on a parabolic microphone. We had him, not on speculation, but on his own smug confession. We didn't go to the police first. The police had guests at that gala. Instead, Mara and Felix helped us compile a dossier. We took it to an investigative journalist named Anya, whose mother had been in a bad care home. She was a pit bull with a byline. Her series, The Golden Harvest, broke the story wide open. It named names, showed connections, played snippets of our recordings. The public outrage was instant and volcanic. With the spotlight blazing, the authorities had to act. Raids happened. Golden Years facilities were shut down. Dr. Finch was arrested at his country club. Martin Thorne was questioned, but his layers of insulation held for the moment. The network was decapitated. Dozens of families came forward with similar stories. The Rosewood Trust was inundated. We'd won a major battle, but the war had just grown bigger. Victory has a price. The shadowy interests we'd damaged didn't vanish. They went to ground. The threats became more sinister. A fake IRS audit. A smear campaign online suggesting I was exploiting the trust for personal gain. My past was dredged up. My fight with Elizabeth was framed as a bitter family feud. Proof I was litigious and unstable. They were using Elizabeth's old playbook against me. The irony was exquisite and painful. Under the stress, my own health, long ignored, sent a bill. A dizzy spell sent me to the hospital. Mild hypertension, the doctor said. You must reduce stress. I almost laughed. How do you reduce stress when you are the stressor? Ben begged me to step back, but looking at the files piling up in our makeshift office, the faces of the people we hadn't yet reached, I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Caleb had a solution. He knew of a place, a former convent turned into secure private apartments. High walls, a single gate, a sense of quiet community. He and Ben moved me there. My cottage became a decoy, still monitored. The trust's operations moved to a nondescript office downtown. We created layers. For the first time since the rock came through the window, I slept through the night. From the sanctuary, my role changed. I became less of a field agent and more of a strategist, a mentor. Leo, his grandmother Eleanor, now safe and her assets restored, became a full-time advocate. He had a fire in him. We trained others, tech-savvy grandchildren, suspicious neighbors, retired nurses who knew the medical signs of coercion. We were building an army of witnesses. Every system has a crack. Felix, our forensic accountant, found ours. The network needed clean money to operate its legitimate fronts. They used a small, family-owned bank with old-fashioned oversight. One of the tellers, a woman named Gloria, had noticed odd patterns, large cash deposits from care home accounts, followed by wire transfers to shell companies. She was afraid to speak up. We reached out to her through secure channels. Gloria met Anya, the journalist, in a park at dawn. She brought spreadsheets, internal memos. The money trail was now a neon highway. This was the evidence that could tie the operational thugs like David to the suited enablers like Martin Thorne and the corrupt professionals. Gloria was brave, but terrified. We placed her and her family under a protective detail arranged by Caleb. With Gloria's evidence, the Financial Crimes Unit moved in. The arrests this time were in boardrooms and law offices. The insulation failed. Martin Thorne was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and money laundering. His calm menace was replaced by a stunned pallor on the evening news. It was a reckoning. The message was sent. The hunters could become the hunted. We held a quiet gathering at the sanctuary. Mara, Felix, Caleb, Leo, Anya, Ben, and myself. We should have been celebrating, but the mood was somber. We had seen too much of the darkness. We had saved many, but we knew for every one we found, 10 might be suffering in silence. The victory felt hollow, a single cup of water poured on a forest fire. That night, I had a dream. Not of Elizabeth or courtrooms, but of a vast, quiet library. In it, every file we'd created, every story we'd documented, was not just a case, but a lesson. A way to see the pattern before it was complete. I woke with a certainty. We weren't just a crisis response team. We needed to be a prevention institute. We rebranded. The Rosewood Trust became the Rosewood Institute for Protective Autonomy. We launched public seminars, Protecting Your Legacy, The Signs of Financial Coercion, How to Have That Conversation with Your Family. We created simple, legal, health check kits, power of attorney templates, guides for choosing independent medical advocates. We taught people to build their own moats before the siege began. Our work reached universities. A brilliant, passionate law student named Sophia approached us. She wanted to write her thesis on the legal frameworks that enable elder abuse and how to dismantle them. She wasn't just interested in the law. She was interested in changing it. We took her on as an intern. Her fresh mind, unjaded by the fights we'd had, saw new solutions, new technological tools for monitoring and protection. Under Sophia's guidance, we embraced the digital world we'd feared. She developed a secure, encrypted app for our network. It allowed isolated individuals to file daily, all-clear checks, document interactions, and store vital documents in a digital vault accessible only to designated, vetted advocates. It was a technological lifeline. Caleb oversaw its security. It was our version of a neighborhood watch for the entire country. A year after the Institute's launch, I received an invitation. Not a threat, not a bribe. An invitation to testify before a parliamentary select committee on aging and social care. They were reviewing laws on power of attorney and guardianship. They wanted to hear from practitioners on the front line. It was a chance to move from fighting individual fires to changing the code that allowed the arson. I sat at the long oak table, microphones before me, politicians peering down. Ben, Leo, and Sophia sat behind me. I didn't read a prepared statement. I told stories, Cora's story, Eleanor's story. I showed them the pattern. I explained how the law, designed to protect, could be weaponized. I presented our Institute's proposals for reform, mandatory independent review for guardianship applications, a national registry for powers of attorney, stricter penalties for professional enablers. My testimony made headlines. Grandmother takes on Westminster. Some MPs were dismissive, some were deeply moved, but we had planted a seed. A cross-party group formed to explore the reforms. The work was slow, grinding, far from the dramatic stings and raids. But it was the most important work we had ever done. We were trying to rewire the system itself. Among the hate mail and the gratitude, one letter stood out. The postmark was from a prison. It was from Martin Thorne. His expensive stationery was gone, replaced by prison-issue paper. He didn't ask for forgiveness or make excuses. He wrote just 3 lines. "You were right. The machine needed breaking. I am relieved it is broken." It was the most unnerving letter I ever received. Not a threat, but a confession of a different kind. With Sophia graduating and Leo now a seasoned advocate, I began to step back, truly. My final project was the Legacy Archive. We digitized every case, every pattern, every method we'd encountered. Anonymized, of course. It was a living textbook for the next generation of protectors. We partnered with universities, social work programs, and police academies. The knowledge would not retire when I did. I spend my days now in the sanctuary's garden. I grow roses, of course, not the perfect scentless hybrids Elizabeth favored, but old, rambling varieties with thorns and glorious, untamed perfume. Ben visits with his children. Leo and Sophia run the Institute with fierce compassion. Caleb still handles security, though now he mostly worries about cyber attacks. One afternoon, a woman was shown into the garden. She was in her 50s, elegant, with an air of deep sadness. She introduced herself as Evelyn, Dr. Alistair Finch's daughter. She had spent years estranged from her father, appalled by his work. She had come to donate a portion of her inheritance, money she considered tainted, to the Institute. Use it to undo some of the harm, she said. We sat in silence among the roses. 2 women bound by the same man's poison, choosing different antidotes. The fight is never over. The greed that dressed itself as care will always find new costumes. But the landscape has changed. There are more watchers now. More moats, more people who can see the pattern in the wallpaper. The Institute is a beacon, and I have found a peace I never thought possible. Not the peace of surrender, but the peace of a soldier who has fortified the past and trained the next generation of sentries. Elizabeth believed a rose was just for show, something beautiful, controlled, and easily arranged. She was wrong. A rose has thorns. It grows wild if you let it. It climbs walls. And even when cut, its scent lingers, a reminder of what was, and a promise of what can grow again. Peace, I have learned, is not a quiet room. It is the space between the cracks in the noise. The Institute runs without me now, a well-oiled machine of compassion and justice. I tend my roses. I write letters to those still fighting their own Elizabeths. Ben brings his children, and they call me Gran Rose, their small hands sticky from jam tarts, their laughter a balm. Yet in the deepest part of the night, when the garden is silvered by moonlight, I can still feel it. A low, steady burn. Not the wildfire of battle, but the quiet, sustaining fire on a hearth. It is the memory of my own strength. A woman named Cora sends me a pressed flower from her garden every spring. A young man I helped, whose name I promised to forget, sends a postcard from a beach he bought his grandmother. Signed only the saved. These are the embers, and they keep me warm. This morning, a new file landed on my desk. Digitally, of course. Sophia and Leo wanted my eyes on it. A case with a strange circular pattern. An elderly man being persuaded by his nephew to invest in a new digital currency. The promotional material was slick, full of promises. But the address for the company, when Felix dug into it, traced back to a shell corporation that was once, long ago, a minor subsidiary of a company owned by the Sinclair family. Elizabeth's old dry roots, reaching up through the new soil in a different, poisonous form. The greed was the same. The mask was just newer. I felt no rage, only a profound, steady recognition. I typed my notes, my old fingers sure on the keys. Pattern confirmed. Proceed. The work does not end. The garden must always be tended. And I, Rose Sinclair, am still the gardener. My name is Rose, and I am not just a flower. I am the whole damn garden.